Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it.
All right, I'm here tonight with Taylor Doretti, the modern mystic, mentor, and herbalist. Do you call yourself an alchemist? Out of curiosity.
I practice alchemy. I've studied alchemy for years. That's not really a title that I have decided to don just yet. Years ago when I was first introduced to alchemy, I was exposed to both the inner and the external at the same time, which was really cool. And then throughout my mystical study, became a little bit more of the esoteric side and the internal and spiritual alchemical arts. But even now, as I practice the laboratory work and create what I would call alchemical preparations, it's not really something that I super identify with, despite the fact that I practice it. So that's just kind of my feeling or perspective on it. Maybe I'll be calling myself an alchemist here in a year or two, who knows? I don't give it too much weight at the moment.
Fair enough.
With everything going on.
Yeah, definitely. Could you tell maybe myself and the listeners just a little bit more about yourself and kind of your background, just so we can get kind of more familiar with you as a person?
Yeah. So something that just came to mind actually is that right before we get into that, in the spiritual arts and in the mystical path, there's different archetypes that one can step into and embody. And each of those archetypes has traditions, practices, currents of energy that make themselves available to the aspirant. So what I really find in mysticism, and this is just from my own perspective, and I'm sure there's other very experienced occultists who may disagree with this, but in the mystical path, you encounter various different traditions that tend to all center around a unique specialty that allows the aspirant to go deeper into the process of awakening, cultivate more personal power, access and tap into different types of magic. So for me, a mystic is someone who is very well-rounded in all of these different archetypes, like magic, the magician, the sorcerer, the alchemist, and a lot of what you see, they overlap in various areas. So for me, I've studied classical ceremonial magic. I currently study sorcery and different traditions of indigenous arts, same with shamanism. At the same time, my primary teacher that I refer to would call himself a cosmopolitan mystic because he had a core practice or core his core path was tantric Vajrayana Buddhism, and that was his core vein. But he also went off and studied all these different other traditions that allowed him to go deeper and integrate more in his enlightenment process. So I really resonate with that aspect of the different archetypes, the awakening human. And each time I immerse myself in a study, or really anyone does, you take on that mental structure that is often associated with that tradition, with that spiritual heritage, that lineage, that current of energy, and that specific flavor of occultism, or even at the higher levels, that specific flavor or expression of enlightenment. So when I practice immersing myself in the alchemical philosophy and the mindset of an alchemist and looking at the world as the classical alchemists would. However, what really influences my studies and my art is the application of all of those other different experiences and traditions that I have studied and that are a part of me. Specifically, more recently, the shamanic and the sorcery side, because they are traditions that are very much associated with various entities, spirits, and egregores of nature, and different cosmic intelligences that express themselves through these different traditions that are, at the core, have a lot of herbal and nature magic behind them. So I am kind of floating between these these different perspectives as I practice, because the plants will tell you something completely different than what you may read in classic Hermetic literature. So I never really take any one art as matter of fact, but really start to listen to the subtleties and the voices or the expressions of these different beings of nature that are involved in the process, whether that's me, or seeing that process being expressed and manifested in my world as I'm doing that operation in the lab, or whether it's, for example, when I was harvesting some olive leaf on my benefactor's land a week or two ago. It became very clear to me after I cut a couple branches that the knife wanted to be used a certain way and that the branch wanted to be cut a certain way. And when I listened to that intuitive kind of voice, everything became very smooth. And I didn't have to saw anything off. It was just a quick little snap, cut, boom. It became a lot more fluid and natural. So paying attention to what's going on in those traditions and how they naturally relate with the individual, I think is really important, and allows you to fully express and experience those archetypes of those traditions at a very different level and a personalized level. And that's something that I think is very important to recognize, is the traditions in themselves have lived on because they work, or an aspect of them works, but the individual practitioner is creating their own path within this tradition or this vein, and really finding their own way through higher states of awareness and consciousness.
Yeah, wow. There's so many directions I could go with all that. My mind is branching off into multiple places, but
yeah.
So yeah, it seems like you kind of have a really overall like a well-rounded and well-versed perspective as far as different kind of practices are concerned. And I think that you kind of come generally from like a you approach things more of like from an Eastern perspective, versus like a Western esoteric tradition, in terms of kind of how you've been taught and instructed. Is that correct?
Yeah, my introduction to spirituality. Well, I'd say it's partially true. Yeah, I was raised in a very conservative Christian family, and that was my life for about 15, 16 years. I wanted to become a pastor and really lead people to the Lord, as they might put it. And in my teenage years, I started having different experiences and different um, mental conversations around, what is spirituality, what is God, things of that, which I'm sure everyone who grew up in a religion tends to go through it at some point, or most people in general. There's nothing really unique about that. But um, my first introduction into tradition was through my college girlfriend. Mother was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and she introduced me into a structured system at the time, which had a very specific type of meditation. There was very specific reasons why you practice these different things, and the philosophies made sense. And it wasn't just about, enlightenment or bust. There was practical, grounded wisdom in it, which I found to be very unique and helpful at a time where I didn't really know what I was doing, where my life was going, or anything like that. And through my own experimentation, it was a couple years later, after I'd started studying and practicing yoga and started meditating, that alchemy was actually the first mystical tradition that I was introduced to, and that's when I met Avery. Actually, I was at a health convention, and a friend of mine. I was just getting into energy work at the time, and that's something that I don't really practice now. But I was a friend of mine who was kind of teaching me different energy systems. Was like, hey, there's these two people that are like real alchemists downstairs. You gotta like go check them out. And so I went down and I met Avery, and had a very initiatic experience. And about a month or so later, he ended up moving within like 15, 20 minutes of me from where I lived at the time in LA. And so I got to spend a lot of time with him and work in the lab and assist him and just kind of be around someone who was living that art form. And it was right after that I met my first teacher of mysticism, who taught me mystical meditation, who actually was a very conscious being herself. And she actually introduced me into my first enlightened teacher, who was her teacher. And so that's kind of where that deeper study of esoteric studies, came forth. And that was inherently Eastern, but at the same time, like, I have a very Western mind in a lot of ways. And so, I work in technology now, and I find that approach, like the Western mind, Eastern body kind of approach, can be very helpful. But now it's just a smorgasbord of experiences, and they all blend together, and I don't really see them as anything separate, unless I were to immerse myself and focus only on that one expression.
Sure. There's two things I want to ask you in response to that. One thing I find interesting, you come from a kind of a conservative Christian family. I come from the same vein, pretty much. I feel like a lot of us out here do. So when you were kind of getting into these, like the esoteric subject matters or different forms of, just approaching life in general, what was kind of the feedback like as far as like you and your family were concerned? Was it kind of like a little tension there, or I don't know, from my perspective and my experiences, it's kind of like a foreign thing, and it's I think a lot of it has to do with just the unknown aspects of a lot of it that's people are confused about generally. I'm curious, like, your perspective on all of that.
Yeah. Um, my parents actually told me to move out of the house about 2 weeks after I graduated high
Oh,
school, and that
okay.
was mainly because of the lifestyle that I was living and the curiosities that I had. I didn't want to go to church anymore. I wanted to explore life and have different experiences. And when you grow up in a Christian family, sex, drugs, and rock and roll is not exactly the path forward. So um, that was kind of what caused that separation, which was really a blessing, because even though it was, life was really hard for about 5-6 years, from about 18 to 22, 23. Some of those years I was homeless, just kind of flopping from friends, cousin's house to friends dad's house, or just random places wherever I could stay for a couple nights here and there. But that kind of caused a healthy separate. Would say it was an unhealthy separation, but for me, I found it to be very helpful, because um, it made me tap into my own ability to figure things out and take full responsibility for life, which was
For
very
sure.
helpful. Um, you know, Even now, my parents and my family and I have a really good relationship. I see them, probably once or twice a month, but it's just kind of I share with them about my beliefs and my experiences to the degree that would make sense for them. I don't really try to start. I used to try and start arguments and debates and all this all over the time and prove them wrong, and that just doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really help anyone, and it causes separation. And out of anything that I've experienced, is that the path of unity is what really brings people together, not just as family but as humanity as a whole. So that's really where I try
Absolutely.
to focus, is what we have in common.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that. The other thing I wanted, you mentioned your teacher, enlightened teacher. I was
Yeah,
wondering if you could expand on kind of your understanding of the concept of enlightenment.
sure. Yeah, so this is something that, depending on your background and your studies, you'll have different structures of understanding for. When I refer to enlightenment, I'm referring to the classical Eastern um, definition, in which it's a fully integrated and enlightened individual, where that process takes a very physical, avataric like expression through the human. um, and so something that may kind of help build scaffolding for that. The way that I was the first kind of system that I was kind of taught was, you have um, people who are interested in spirituality and spiritual trainings and knowledge, things like that, and then you have mystics, where they start to have where the supernatural is their natural world, where they're going into deep states of samadhi and light on a daily basis in their practice. And when they engage with the world, they're interacting with the world um, in kind of that mundane level, but they're seeing everything from a supernatural point of view. And at a certain point in one's meditation, um, you move into what we could kind of call self realization, which is where you start to have the experience of Salvakalpa Samadhi when you meditate. So, Salvakalpa Samadhi can be loosely distilled down to the uh, experience of eternity through the individual awareness. So it's Sky experiencing eternity, or Taylor experiencing eternity. And um, this is a meditative phenomena that happens, in which it starts to an imprint happens on the individual's consciousness. And they start to slowly shed those deeper some samskaras and karmic layers that are really holding them back from that true nature. And at a certain point, you will move into what we can call liberation, which is nirvikalpa samadhi. And that is the complete eradication of the individual self during meditation. So when Sky sits down to meditate, there's no longer any Sky. There's no phenomenal experience. There's not even the experience of meditation. It's just the clear light of reality. It's kind of like being turned inside out, but there's no sensorial perception or perspective. There's no experience there. It's just emptiness. And at a certain point, when that's been integrated or let go of, the individuals start moving into states of sahaja samadhi, where they have become eternity, experiencing life through an individual point of awareness. So it's like the ocean experiencing life through the drop. And at that point, we could equivalent that to cosmic consciousness, as some traditions like to call it. I know that's very popular in the New Age community, but I've never met any New Age teacher or Instagram teacher that has come close to any sort of understanding of what that is, because oftentimes the energies and the intelligence that begins to draw to the human, it can be very fracturing and destabilizing, which is why it's very important for the individual to be grounded and have a practical lifestyle that can support those deeper states of enlightenment and awareness and awakening. Which is why I think a lot of Western schools, they do a very good job in teaching how to be successful in the world and how to have a very structured life. Same with traditional Buddhist and Taoist schools, where it's mindfulness is a very important part of the individual's practice, because when you are being flooded with Kundalini and reality begins to just start melting around you in oceans of light, it's very easy to have moments of what could be perceived as insanity, but you're just seeing beyond the first attention. You're seeing beyond the physical world. And that typically takes a while to integrate. And I have found that having different teachers and benefactors of different traditions, they all lend very unique pathways to integrating those types of experiences. They hardly agree with each other, which is why I find it incredibly important to do your own, like have those experiences yourself and do your own research and find a teacher who has studied multiple paths and who is in those levels of attention and who has that degree of awakening, because they can help guide you, either direct you and empower you when you're doing really well, or kind of help make correction things are going a little off.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple words that you mentioned that I was hoping maybe you could give some definitions for myself as well as the listeners. Samsaras. Curious what exactly is a samsara, and then like states of samadhi. Like what would be like? How would you define samadhi as well?
Wow, we're just like getting straight to the the essence of advanced spiritual teaching or spiritual seeking, I guess. So samskaras can be defined or referred to as past life karmas or past life tendencies. It's the habitual tendencies that are carried over from one lifetime to the next. And the karmas that you accumulate in this life are a result of your individual mental structure and the life and the environment that you've been in this time around. I'm starting to develop a different understanding and perspective of this now, because I'm getting to a point where I don't even know if I actually even believe in or agree with past lives anymore, because that would inherently define that that humans or any living being is actually separate. And if anything has taught me that nothing is separate, it's only a perception of it. But classically, samskaras are taught to be past life karmas and tendencies that you carry over from these different lifetimes that are those deeper layers of what keep you from recognizing and experience your true awareness and your true essence. So we have these different dreams where we're experiencing a different player in the video game of life. And when you're born into this new reality, there is something very specific that your character, your individual can do. And we can find clues to that by looking at the astrological chart to know what subconscious or unconscious energies and natural abilities can be present within the individual. And there's entire schools of study around this, like karmic astrology and all these different things. And so as one begins to make progress in their awakening, they first have to let go of the karmas from this life, and they have to grow beyond that person that they were, quote unquote, destined to be. And that's where they just start to expand beyond who they are now, whether it's letting go of habits or ways of thinking or mental programming and conditioning, things like that. Those are all working through those karmas that you pick up in this lifetime. Like you could even call smoking or different types of addiction, preferences of any sort. Those can be the karmas that you've accumulated as a result of the actions in this life. And those are let go or burnt off through energetic practices and through meditation and through lifestyle refinement. Samadhi is a application of the meditative state. It's union with something. And so different traditions will teach entry beginner levels of meditation, like just because it's very hard to just sit there and stop your thoughts immediately, right? So that's why these different traditions are like, observe your thoughts and then be conscious of what ideas they're coming from. And that's like very elementary kind of approach. And the more advanced practices, which you start seeing in different tantric traditions like Vajrayana Buddhism and old school Shaivaic Tantra and things like that, they start meditating on these sacred symbols like the Sri Yantra, or they will apply the meditative state to a very specific energy center in the body. And they will get so deep in that meditative state to where they will completely burn off the karmas that reside in the different chakras within the body. So there's different ways to go about it, but the core element of it is being able to achieve samadhi, attain samadhi, where you completely have let go of the individual identity and you have merged with with either the different layers of the true self. So you can start going beyond into the causal, and you can merge with light directly, and that's very freeing and illuminating. You're just not here. You're just being bathed in light. Wow. The waters of Siloam which is something that a lot of Western schools will probably be familiar with. That's a state of samadhi, to where there's a level of emptiness and bliss that runs over that runs through the consciousness, and it restores the body on a subtle energetic level. But really, samadhi comes into play by first letting go of the identity of who you think you are in this lifetime, going beyond it, and then merging with these higher states of consciousness that could be referred to as archetypal or deity, or ultimately just eternity itself. The absolute ether is another, thing we could kind of point to. By meditating on these symbols and these concepts and these energies, we merge with them together. And so that's what the magician is doing, is performing an operation and merging with that energy, so that that energy leaves an impression on its consciousness. Or the sorcerer will focus and meditate on a aspect of animalistic consciousness, and then will begin to actually physically take form and shapeshift into that animal. Or you project out of your body and you focus on the subtle physical body, and then you become the subtle physical body. So the aspect of mystical practice, of magical attainment, is a result of being able to apply single pointed focus through a meditative application to either become imprinted by something or to become something. And that's when we move into those higher stages of awakening, also called self-realization, liberation, enlightenment, where we begin to actually become that expanded awareness or attention outside of this limited mental, physical body that we call Taylor or Sky or fill in the blank.
Damn. You do a great job unpacking and describing these things, so that's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I've got a lot of really badass teachers that
sounds like it
have taken such a risk at working with a degenerate like me.
So what are some of the ways in which like the Eastern traditions, like in regards to your esoteric practices, kind of inform your perspective on things like alchemical understandings or things of that nature?
Let me make sure I understand the question. How has Eastern traditions or practices helped me understand alchemical or Western philosophy better?
Yeah, and then maybe what would you say are some of the differences between the Eastern and Western practices, and then maybe some of the crossover, and like what would you find that there's some, I'm sure there's some different aspects to the Eastern tradition that might generally be a little bit more difficult to find in the Western tradition, or maybe not, I don't know. That's my question, I guess. So there's a few questions there, but
okay. Well, let's start with the first one, which is, how has the Eastern tradition helped me personally? When I first started studying occultism and magic, I got very interested in the idea of power and wanting to have the phenomenal experience that different magicians and magicians or different Western occultists talked about. Mostly because I was at a place in my life to where I was, I was tired of being the underdog, and I didn't really know who I was and what I was good at. And so I was just like, okay, maybe I can use this to help me get ahead in life. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to magic in general, is that they're looking for answers and ways to improve their lifestyle or their life as a whole, as well as whatever spiritual things. I started getting really kind of lost in that, and something didn't feel right about it. Like, it didn't feel that the Western path was like, it was probably a combination of me not having a teacher when I first encountered that. Like, I started studying chaos magic. Like, that was my first introduction. And like, you get lost in like the worst, weirdest types of people when you just find chaos magic forums on the internet. So I didn't really have a teacher to guide me, which I think was the first issue. second thing was something intuitively led me away from that. And I had a strong meditation practice at the time. And I was told by a friend of mine, well, actually, a couple months after I started feeling that way, I was introduced to my first, or to my benefactor, who I still study with to this day. And he kind of showed me a very well-rounded way of studying and magic and sorcery, and how it's actually used to attain higher states of consciousness. But what really impacted me the most was when I learned mystical meditation, and I started going into light on a daily basis, because I started to experience the unraveling of the identity and started to begin to open up to different levels of awareness that had such a profound experience on my life. And my teacher who taught this, he very much put a very important focus on mindfulness and having a personal dharma, a personal, like a purpose in life, and also becoming very successful in the world through whether it's business or whatever your individual dharma was. Some people in that small group I was in, they're now acupuncturists and doctors. Other people are, solutions architects and technology for tech companies. Some people run their own business, some are musicians. So that was what really helped me, was understanding dharma, as you have the dharma of enlightenment, and also the individual dharma, because it made the enlightenment process personal, and it gave an outlet of expression for all of these studies that that I was going through, and all these changes. Like, it's when you study with an advanced, or some degree of enlightened teacher, you are going through rapid transformations. Like, every time you meditate with them, it's just boom, 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 like right after the other. Because at that level, this is what I find really cool about the Eastern traditions, is that they have a what they call empowerments. So there's different ways to kind of look at empowerments and initiations and things like that. And they're a little different, but they're similar at the same time. But when you meditate with an enlightened teacher, they're expanding their aura and their awareness to pull you inside of it, and to where all of your limitations that are stopping you from reaching that state of meditative absorption or awareness are completely gone. So they're absorbing your karmas temporarily and allowing you to experience varying degrees of higher consciousness during your meditation with them. And that was something I think is so rare and unique and beautiful. And that was what kind of changed all of that. And just spending time with my teacher taught me to look at the world through a different view. And studying those different Eastern traditions, and reading those different Eastern spiritual books really taught me how to live in a more mindful, harmonious state with the world, rather than trying to impress my will upon the world, but go with the flow. It sounds so simple, but it's easier said than done. So having a teacher who can show you the way is very helpful. And that, to me, was the most valuable thing, was just being around someone who was an embodiment of the Tao,
Wow.
and that was the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, the teachers you kind of spoke to that, like with that like expansive aura aspect.
Yeah.
I think I've listened to like a few people describe this. I think it was actually Duncan Trussell. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, dude, I love him. He was like, when I first started like getting involved, or like listening to like Western esotericism and stuff like that, I would listen to his podcast, and I was like, this guy is a genius. He's
He is a
great.
genius. He's on the ball. Yeah, I think he was talking about maybe being in the presence of like Ram Dass or something like that. And it was pretty fascinating. It must have something to do with the purity of their consciousness, or just maybe their own individual dharma or whatever. I'm wondering, like, in terms of, say, like you've achieved you've developed the ability to achieve this samadhi experience or state, and you're kind of holding, or like, emanating that presence. As far as like maintaining that presence and that state, is this something that could be lost and then come back, and then kind of is it something you have to maintain, and like how would somebody go about maintaining it? And I'm kind of curious about like the dynamics with that kind of.
So when you're studying with a teacher, they're constantly transmitting and radiating energy and states of consciousness, and that allows you to kind of that wake and go above and beyond, kind of like surf in a way, and allows you to make progress really quickly. And then when you're on your own and you're living in the world, you're just like, it's like, it's sometimes it can be a little like shocking and abrasive sometimes. So that's the mindfulness of mysticism, is learning how to keep single pointed focus, maintain your attention, and really just stay in a happy place. I've noticed that the more you focus on what brings you more energy, what makes you happy, the more authentic you're living your life. All of these things will naturally allow those meditative states to pour over into the rest of your life. And so my teacher made a very big point that after you meditate, do something that is unique to you, because then you will begin to create a new ahamkara, or a new created self, and you'll create a new structured, or a new mental structure or identity that's more true to yourself and true to who you are. And so for the people that want to be musicians, after you meditate, go practice music for half an hour. For the people who want to be artists, go do art for an hour, and stay in a mindful place while you do it. Like, only focus on that action itself. And you will start to go into meditative states while you're doing that thing. And that crossover of meditation and the waking state, of going into those higher states of awareness while doing that activity, is what really opens the door to maintaining those meditative absorption states. Some traditions, one of my teachers, he calls it ceiling realization, where when you meditate and when you go into samadhi, you are temporarily or possibly permanently letting go of all karmas that are keeping you in the world, right? Or maybe you have these deep imbalances, and when you meditate, you're such a good meditator that you can let go and bypass all of that and go into these higher states of meditative absorption. And then when you come back, all of those kind of karmas kind of begin to activate as the mind becomes more active. And it's very common for people to go through what they call middle. And it's when you can meditate and reach degree of self-realization, liberation, enlightenment, whatever, and then you're back in the world, and you're like kind of in this awakened state, but then you can like fall back when you have but then you fall out of it when you're in this like mundane experience. Maybe it's like an argument or some kind of emotional thing that's going on, and then it pulls you out of it, and then you're back by yourself, and then you're in this illumined, more awakened state. And then you're on a conference call with work, and that brings you into a totally different state of mind, right? So for someone who's living and working in the world, this is a totally different ballgame. And it's I think it's a higher level in a way, because you're dealing with so many different uh, scenarios and dreams and experiences that sages and monks didn't go through when they were just in the monasteries or in the hills or the deserts. So this is where you kind of get that um, those different stories and mythologies about Buddha like sitting under the tree for 40 days meditating, Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, all of these kind of going away and coming back. That's supposedly when these different enlightened beings went off, sealed, and made their enlightenment permanent or fully embodied or actualized. And when then they came back, they were not influenced by the different moment to moment experiences that they were involved in. They were just constantly in that thing. So it's practice. You have to practice being awake. That's really all I can say is you just have to, one, become a good meditator, and then two, learn what triggers you to fall out or fall into it, and find a teacher. Like that's the most important thing that I would say is like find a teacher, because the more you're around them, the more their consciousness supports you, the more their energy keeps you in that state.
For sure. Yeah, I think that like some of the things you're speaking to about kind of, just living in these days we're in with all the busyness and chaos and whatnot, kind of speaks to your, like the modern mystic type way of being.
Yeah.
And then, so as far as, finding a teacher for somebody who's out there and listening and interested and are wondering how might they discern and be able to determine a good quality, genuine teacher versus maybe one that's not looking out for their best interest necessarily, or maybe like one that's just trying to gain power over them for some reason, or how would you kind of direct people to navigate seeking out a teacher and what to look for, and maybe what are some of the experiences that you've had or learned from in that regard?
Yeah. There's a couple different things I really want to touch on with this. The first thing I want to say is that there's no such thing as a bad or false teacher. And what I mean by that is that if an individual is having a experience or has spent time with a teacher who either may not be what they claim to be, or someone who has mistreated and hurt others, there is still a type of learning process, a karmic lesson that is unfolded as a result of that. So this is very much an Eastern way of looking at things. Of it's neither bad nor good, it just is, right? As Westerners, we don't really like those answers because it doesn't make logical sense, right? So from my own experience, all of my teachers I encountered in the dreaming before I actually met them in person. And these encounters happened over months or years before I met them in person. Not everybody may have this experience, but this is something that can be common. And that is how you know there's a deeper connection beyond the worldly relationship. There's some type of inner psychic plane, whether that's you studying with them in a past life or having some kind of past life connection or whatever. There's some type of psychic connection that's already been established. Second thing is you will feel really good after you meditate or spend time with them consistently. It's not this like, sometimes like when you spend time with someone who is manipulative, while you're with them, you feel really good, right? But then afterwards, you can tend to feel drained or tired or agitated or not like yourself. It's different. While you're with them, a lot of teachers will intentionally push your buttons, and try to aggravate those karmas out of you, and they'll try to trigger you intentionally so that you can grow from it and move on. But afterwards, you'll generally feel really amazing and really high after. So that's something that I always think is important to look out for. Um, Look for someone who kind of aligns with your values. Follow your intuition and know what you're looking for. There's teachers out there who can teach you technologies, who can teach you systems of energy, and they may not have anything to do with actually becoming self-realized or enlightened. That's what you see. From my perspective, you see that a ton in the spiritual marketplace. There's all these different types of star seeds and channelers and that whole new age world, where they're focusing on these phenomenal identity-based experiences. And a lot of those things you can probably learn a lot in terms of energy, astral and psychic experiences. You can probably shop around and go get yourself a couple dozen certifications and make some type of psychic development progress. But if you're really looking to go beyond your limitations, if you're looking to go beyond your identity, if you're looking to become more conscious and actually experience what these traditions have talked about and point to, these states of bliss and limitless freedom, that's a little bit harder to come by typically. And it was always very internally intuitive for me to find those. It just happened very naturally for me. And I feel very blessed and lucky that was the case. Meditating with teachers is always a good way to feel their energy directly. And oftentimes you'll see light around the teacher. If you were to open your eyes, visual phenomena will start to occur. Anytime you see like clear, black, white, or gold light, that means that there is some type of attainment that is emanating out of that teacher. So that's always a really good sign, is look for the light. Literally every tradition, like you look at all these pictures of saints and they have the halos over them, it's because there's a degree of enlightenment pouring out of them. You look at the different Buddha or the different Buddhas or the monks meditating with Buddha and all these different Eastern famous spiritual characters and teachers, they all have these auras around them that are often gold or white. And that is a visual phenomenal manifestation of enlightened states of consciousness. But in this day and age, like in 2021, 2022, you got to feel what you're being led to do, like what you're being led to study. For me, I was looking for a teacher who could actually, who actually was genuinely enlightened, who knew what that was and could show me the way forward. And two, the non-negotiable for me was someone who was actually functional and successful in the world. All of my teachers have had degrees of success in the world. Now, whether they're still practicing businessmen or they're, financially stable now is a little bit different story, but they all had success in the world to some degree.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that was something that was important to me when I first started the path, because I didn't want to become a monk. I didn't want to move to the mountains of Colorado or something like that. I wanted to go and work, and I wanted to have a career, and I wanted to become enlightened. and so those were kind of the two desires that set me on that path. And lo and behold, one of my benefactor was a very successful marketer who worked for large corporations, and my teacher was a very successful computer programmer and software engineer who built a lot of what is used in e-commerce today. He developed some of the base code for that industry. back in the 90s and early 2000s.
Amazing. It's interesting to think about. Typically, one might think of a mystical enlightened teacher as being kind of in opposition to technological advancement, or it kind of doesn't generally strike that image in your mind. So it's kind of cool that, but hey, it's a modern mystic, you know. But I wanted to ask you, are we able to name names? Can we talk a little bit about some of your teachers and who they are, or is that
I know one of my teachers would prefer to stay anonymous right now.
Mm-hmm.
So he's pretty inaccessible, so open for a later date maybe. But my benefactor that I study shamanism and Tantra, as well as, you know, magic. His name is Coyote the Blind. He's a Toltec Nawal or shaman, and he's a very very incredible individual. He teaches publicly. He's got classes on YouTube, or he's got lectures on YouTube on every Tuesday night that you can go watch. They have a community house and a property a couple hours away from, about 2 hours away from where I live, and they teach a lot of indigenous related traditions. One of his oldest students is a lineage holder in the Lakota tradition. So they hold sweat lodges and vision quests on their land. He was classically trained through an esoteric school or Western magical school. So I don't know if he still does, but he teaches some degrees of magic, but he's kind of my core teacher benefactor at the moment, just because of some of the work that I'm doing. It's directly related, you know, through him.
Really cool.
So he's a cool teacher. He's very public. He's super unique, you know. He was a refugee from El Salvador and studied with a Mexican Indian who is still he's like 108, 109 years old now. Studied with him for a couple decades. So he's got a super cool background, and I would really encourage anyone to check him out, because he just offers a totally different perspective of the world, and he has a really unique blend of Eastern and Western traditions. So he's a good one to check out. Let's see. From alchemy, I mean, I have I don't have a personal relationship with Robert Bartlett, but he's kind of the main dude who's still alive that I, kind of study his recipes and his books and things like that, his lectures, things like that. I plan on going to his classes next year when they open back up. Avery was a really big influence for me early on. He's a very, very close friend. I haven't seen him or heard from him in over a year now, probably, like most people, I'm sure. But he was pretty influential and was a really good friend to me, early on.
And then you mentioned a female teacher, is that correct?
Yeah. So she was the ex-partner of the teacher that I will kind of keep anonymous, her as well. We don't really have a personal relationship now, but she was really influential and really helped me get going early on with studying mysticism and meditation. But there was a falling out at one point.
So with traditions of sorcery, I'm really curious about, like different traditions that you might be familiar with, or kind of how you just describe like sorcery in general, like give us a little insight into the world of sorcery,
Yeah.
and kind of different aspects.
Yeah. Sorcery and shamanism they cross over a lot. Anyone who is any really advanced sorcerer is often a very powerful shaman, but not everyone who is a shaman is a powerful sorcerer, or an accomplished sorcerer, you could say. Sorcery really kind of boils down to manifesting your will through personal power. That's a very simplistic description of it, but it's a little chaotic in a way. You could maybe call it kind of like the chaos magician of that role, because you're using your intuitive knowledge of the natural world and of magic, and you're using the natural elements of whatever's available and accessible to you around you to do an operation or a magical operation, and then you are kind of rolling the dice on how that manifests. It's like you're doing the legwork, and then the way that it expresses or manifests is kind of out of your control at that moment. So you have like your intent that you're trying to use your will and personal power to manifest, but the way in which that does that is the sorcery, you could say. It's like, how did that happen? I don't know. It just worked, like versus magic, which is very operational, and you are using correspondences, you're using formulas to channel different energies and your own will to create a very specific outcome. So in magic, they always talk about, like, the more specific, the better, right? Or like your magical intent, make it short and specific. That's a a calculated magician versus a sorcerer who's like, let me take these sticks and bones and communicate with this spirit and, do this thing. And, I don't know, it'll rain tomorrow or something. So it's just a little bit more of a roll the dice versus a calculated, tactful thing. That being said, there are traditions of sorcery that have very specific formulas to them. A lot of those traditions, they make pact with different cosmic entities or forces of nature. And oftentimes these are very high or enlightened entities, or they are the manifestation of a specific archetypal force of nature, which is very different than like your elemental spirits and astral beings and things like that, which is like what a lot of different traditions like witchcraft kind of associate more with, like more astral nature energies, things like that, elementals, versus different sorcery traditions are using higher archetypal powerful forces to direct or call upon or make deals to do that. The thing about sorcery is sorcery really teaches you how to channel and direct your intent, how to cultivate personal power, and also the most important thing is that it teaches you how to manipulate your attention. And there is different dimensions of attention that sorcery really is dependent on, that isn't really talked about in different magical systems. And you're kind of expanding your awareness to where you're actually existing in different dimensions at the exact same time, and you have your split awareness in multiple places. So that, I think, is very unique to sorcery. I think it's a very powerful way of exercising that muscle but it's not a tradition that would classically lead to enlightenment, like more meditative or energetic or kundalini based systems like the East. The East has a very had a very powerful dharma of becoming enlightened. But if you look at some of those worlds or some of those different countries, they are missing things that the indigenous and shamanic and sorcery traditions naturally, like what's naturally a part of the world, like the different indigenous traditions, they have a very deep relationship with nature that is unparalleled in any form of spirituality. There's a reason why they speak to the land and they listen to the wind, and they're dealing with the forces of nature and the spirits of nature, because that is a core part of that path. And that is something that some of the Eastern traditions, specifically like in India, they just kind of left that behind at a certain point. Now, that's not true for every tradition. Like you see remnants of that in Ayurveda and things like that. But, you go to India, people go there because there's people that have just given up the world and completely and just sit there in meditation and, 20 hours a day. And that's not connected to the world that we live in. So something that took me a long time to really start to see is that all these traditions are very good at very specific things, but right now at this time is where a lot of these traditions, especially in the West, are starting to come together and meet. And in order for humanity to evolve and to grow and to move past this clusterfuck that we find ourselves in, there needs to be a honoring of the natural world. There needs to be a relationship with nature that hasn't been had here for hundreds of years. And so shamanic and sorcery traditions teach you that. They teach you how to communicate with the natural world, that's had the biggest influence on my alchemical practice, because when you talk to the plants and you listen to what they can do magically, what they can do physically, healing, things like that, it's very different than a lot of these classical Western texts where they're really only talking about the physical or the spiritual benefits. But that is the most important thing to really see, to really find, is there's no point in awakening if you're not going to do anything with it. If you're just looking to escape, if you're just looking to sit there in samadhi and just check out, what's the point? The way that I've seen all of my teachers operate is that they're constantly in service to others. They're constantly working to help others and also humanity as a whole, and that's really important, is to, go find your awakening, go find enlightenment, but then what higher state of awareness can you bring to something in the world that is uniquely special to you? Like, what is that unique gift that you can bring out in yourself that can benefit humanity and help us evolve to that next level? And every tradition has its own thing, but it's important for you, the individual, to find yours.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the aspect of being in service is a huge kind of under discussed, maybe not in your realms, I don't know. But I think at large, I think when people generally think of all these different various traditions, it's something that they don't often contemplate if they're not familiar with it, at least from my experience in discussing these things with a lot of people that just aren't familiar yet, that might be curious. But they might think of something like engaging in a magical practice as generally being like a self-serving pursuit, of which of course it can be, right, like anything. But I think that that's a cool and really good thing to emphasize, and draw attention to, because it kind of shows that just with probably a lot of the people that you've come into contact with, or a lot of the genuine teachers that have kind of informed you and your understanding, they've generally given a great deal of service, and that's kind of a lot of what they do and put out there into the world. And then you can kind of in real time probably see that kind of coming back. And so yeah, I just think that's a really cool point that you touched on there. I was wondering, what are some maybe risks, say like in terms of like magic or sorcery, what are some risks that one may want to avoid? Or say like you're doing something like that's involving entities, are there entities that people would want to avoid, or just things to be aware of that could maybe go south, that they would be that they would benefit from just being a little bit weary about, possibly?
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to dealing with spirits and entities and things like that, most Eastern teachers will just say, forget about it, don't worry about it, leave it alone, don't even play with it. And they do that for a reason. A lot of there's different layers or classes or types of beings. And you have astral beings, which are just, these subtle physical beings or intelligences, like elementals that are often associated with the specific elements, like the wind or fire. And then you have what they would kind of refer to as like the hungry ghosts, or maybe like undead spirits, things like that. Then you have causal beings, which are just beings of pure light that live in the worlds of light, that really have your best intent at their core. You have angels and demons and governing forces and intelligence and things like that. And then you have this class of beings that the sorcerers tend to work with, which are called allies. That's just a name that was kind of popularized by Carlos Castaneda. Those types of beings are kind of have an opposite polarity to this world, and they're very powerful, illumined beings that don't really put up with a lot of human silliness. So a type of being that a lot of people are familiar with are like plant spirits, right? So we could call those like astral beings, or kind of existing in the astral world, all the way up to like angels and things like that, which is more causal focused. And then you have cosmic, which is kind of above the causal ish. I would not recommend people work with spirits or entities unless they're directly initiated into a lineage into which there is an agreement with a type of entity or spirit. That is where you have protection. That is where you have kind of a quote unquote contract. And there is a level of mutual understanding and respect between the practitioner and that spirit or that entity. That is probably what I would say is the most safe way to go. People just kind of calling on different types of spirits to do their bidding and whatever, I would don't waste your time. Like, chances are you're not going to get it right. and two, you don't know what you don't know. What I see a lot of in this kind of spiritual marketplace, that I like to call it, is people are saying they're channeling these aliens or these fifth dimensional beings, and most of the time they're just dealing with like lower astral beings that are just kind of playing jokes on them and like fucking with them. And they're just kind of feeding off of that person's energy in exchange for telling them the secrets of the universe and things like that. So, it's really hard to discern when it comes to channeling and mediumship and things like that. Because I have a friend who's a very well-known medium, and he's done some very accurate and legitimate work. At the same time, another old friend of mine from years and years and years ago, he claims to be like channeling an alien, and it's basically just like recycled pseudo spiritual psychology in a lot of ways. So, people are drawn to different things for whatever reasons. I would really I don't really encourage that type of work unless you have someone who can really show you a structured way to do it, because you'll often just end up wasting your time, wasting your energy, or sometimes in worst case scenarios, getting hurt. Right. I think it was some guy who was on your podcast. I think, was it Mark Stavish? Is that his name?
Who's on? Yep.
Yeah. So he was talking about like you asked him a question about like, invoking different angelic or demonic forces. Right. And his answer was pretty spot on. Like, those angelic forces, they have nothing but your best intent at heart. And most of the time they won't do something for you because you don't know the consequences it will bring about, versus those lower demonic forces, which are like, great, you gave me the rum and the, and the offering. Cool. Here's your plate of misfortune, you idiot human. Right. So I would just, if you get drawn to that naturally, then yeah, maybe there's something there for you. But like I've said with all the other things, like, find a teacher who can really show you the right way to do it. Or otherwise it's just a waste of time and energy and, potential putting yourself at risk.
Definitely. All right. I got a couple more questions. One thing I want to ask is, what are some things you're currently working on in terms of experiments in the lab, projects that you have in the works, any kind of stuff like that? Curious.
Yeah. So very soon I'll be launching, kind of my apothecary brand, called Medicine Buddha Labs. And so I'm just kind of finishing up some on that right now. And so that's, will be my artistic expression of the things that I've learned from mysticism and alchemy. And that will be kind of the primary medium that I engage with the world through my, for my alchemical art and practice. Got a podcast that I'll be starting here soon called Buddha Nature. And so that will be guest based like this, but probably most of the episodes I'll just have me talking about different topics and interview people along the way.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. I've been wanting to do that for years and it never really felt right until just recently. So in terms of like stuff that I got going on in the lab, I'm like focusing mainly on herbal work right now. A lot of my early introduction to alchemy was metallic and animal work. And given the current state of the alchemical universe right now, the alchemical community, for me, I really want to perfect my art and practice with the herbal works first. And so I don't really have any sort of draw to metallic work for now. Metallic alchemy is, as everyone knows, very dangerous and very powerful. I encourage people to work with alchemical or metallic remedies as they feel called to do it, because I find that to be very initiatic and very cleansing, but you got to get it from a reputable source. And there's not many of those that I really see. And personally, for right reason, I don't think a lot of people are really offering them for that reason right now. But my herbal practice is really focusing on kind of perfecting the magistrate right now. So, creating a spagyric that is a very perfected and equalized medicine, and learning how these different plants work and how the different processes affect each other and the different subtleties that go along with it is a very long, intensive process. And, I am no expert in this art whatsoever. So it's a lot of trial and error. Stuff that I'll be kind of offering here soon is just like spagyric tinctures and ends extractions, things like that. Ones that I feel I've been able to get really right. But I'm really focused on creating a very, very refined, expression, so that some people can use it as a product, because that's not really my intent. And my intent is not to become a manufacturer and produce alchemical remedies for people at scale. Most of what I'll do, I'll have very limited release, maybe 10, 15 accessible or available, because it's not really, I'm not looking for it right now to become a full-time thing. I would like for that to be the case at some point in the future, but I think it's a little bit further down the road. A project, the main curiosity to me right now with alchemy is actually like the ends extraction. Like that's retention right now, because there's only a couple herbs that are really written about, or at least that I've been able to find. And like everyone knows, like lemon balm, like ends, melissa. But what Paracelsus wrote about the ends is very spiritual, esoteric, and kind of shamanic in its own way. Because when you take a live plant and you perform an extraction of it, and you're actually pulling out that natural pranic force, or that individualized essence or spirit, or life force of the plant, like that's very palpable in a way that like tinctures and other things, I don't feel that same type of resonance. I showed actually a couple enses that I created to my benefactor, and I was like, you can feel the difference in like the tincture versus the versus that. He's like, oh yeah, you can, like the ends extraction is alive, like it's the life force is permeating it. So it's a very unique way to work with the spirit, with the actual personality or spirit of the plant. And I'm sure a lot of people would argue you can do the same with very exalted and very perfected spagyria. But this is just one that I'm like really captivated by right now, just kind of because of the shamanic and the sorcerer background. So I think that's really, really cool. That's kind of what I'm focused on. I've got a couple different things going right now. And that's kind of the main capture point for me.
I love it. That's cool. That's what I enjoy seeing anybody kind of expanding on any areas that are just kind of under explored, I guess, in that regard. So I think that's really cool that you're taking that approach and taking your time to really dial in the plant work as well. I think that's awesome. Looking at all the current activity and excitement right now around alchemy and the mystical arts and esoteric subject matters, what are some visions you might have for the future? Or what are some things that like you would love to see in the future to come within the world of alchemy, spagyria, the mystical arts in general?
Yeah, I kind of oscillate back and forth between two different perspectives. One where, I'd kind of like to keep it a little bit more, I wouldn't say private, but just kind of keep it within a small circle of my friends or people that I work with, things like that. And then another part of me wants to really make a huge push to, offer education and things like that. And, that this isn't new to me for alchemy at all. Like, this is kind of the way that I've seen mysticism overall. um, the reason why I started teaching a couple of years ago was because my teachers told me to. They're like, hey, you need to go start teaching, and that's how you'll make progress, because you're learning quickly right now. So go teach others, and then you'll realize you know nothing. And that's totally the case. You teach someone and you're like, oh my God, I don't know shit. So it's kind of a constant. Teaching is how I learn really well. And so whether it's just teaching meditation, whether it's having conversations, or whether it's creating an artistic expression or a course or a workshop, things like that, that's always how I've had really good success with understanding and integrating things at a deeper level for me. But my vision, personally, is to have my full-time life to essentially be centered around teaching on mysticism, around alchemy, and around those mystical arts. For the past year and a half, I had a private program with another friend of mine, two friends actually, who studied with the same teacher as I did, and we had a small group of students, and we had weekly classes, we did desert journeys, and we did all these things that our teacher did with us, and that was a lot of fun and really, really cool. But we realized very quickly that there's certain refinements in our own life and practice that we needed to do before we started doing that at that level and degree. So what I plan on doing over the next year is working with people kind of one-on-one. I'll probably have some different online courses and workshops, not necessarily centered around alchemy, because I'm not really in a position to teach laboratory alchemy right now, considering that I'm just learning a lot of the intricacies and subtleties and refining my own practice. But I'll most likely be teaching meditation workshops, having different intensives. I'm looking at having an intensive retreat for a week towards the middle or end of 2022. So that's kind of some upcoming things. But my big vision is to have a school, actually, where people can learn mystical arts, where they can learn how to become successful in their field of study or their field of practice. Because there's been a couple schools that I've been exposed to that have done that very specifically with like technology, for example. Like there's a school up in San Francisco. It's a Buddhist school. Enlightened teacher produced a couple liberated students, and they teach their entire student base computer programming and technology and things like them. And they actually were the ones that helped me, move into the technology field. And that's kind of their karma yoga in a way. That's like how they teach people to be mindful and successful in the world, is through technology, because that's a very specific structure. And I want to do something similar like that, but empower people and help people learn to become financially independent, doing the thing that they love, and helping them take their art and their dharma to the next level. And I think if we can create a place to where people are focusing more on expressing and building what makes them who they are, and helping make the world a better place through their individual dharma, I think you'll see a total transformation of humanity over the next couple decades here. If everyone were to follow their dharma, I think the world would be a perfect place in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of distraction everywhere. And so finding that, understanding that, developing that is kind of hard. And so I think building a school and a place of study, both for spiritual realization and lifestyle refinement, is the direction that I want to go in.
That's beautiful. Yeah, the time is now, for sure. I think it's ripe. And yeah, I think, and there's definitely a skill and like an art to teaching and communicating these particular subject matters. And I've talked to a lot of people, and I would agree with your teachers. You're definitely going to do well in that regard. And
Thanks.
I'm really looking forward to your podcast and all that you have coming forward with all your projects. And I'm all about that idea of having a school. I'm fully in line with that vision. That's something that I've been meditating on as well. I want to give you a last opportunity to just put out any last thoughts or any last messages before we wrap it up. And yeah, so.
It's really easy to become enamored with the idea of spirituality and the idea of awakening, becoming more conscious. You spend any time on social media and it's become quite a circus out there. While that I find to be a natural evolution in a way, don't spend too much time like buying your own bullshit and find a way find a path that really teaches you to become true to yourself, not simply conforming and changing your identity and your worldview to somebody else's, but something that allows you to expand and move beyond your current limitations, that teaches you new skills and different ways of seeing the world. And more importantly, something that is really beneficial to the world and not just a select few or different groups, but something that humanity can benefit from overall as a whole. And I find that if anyone really has a real intent and a serious heart and an open heart, those doorways will kind of be opened for them. And the path is going to look different for everyone. Just because something's worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But be a student of life and be willing to accept that you know nothing, and be willing to be wrong, and be willing to experiment and explore and just try things out. That's really important in this world, is to not just get stuck with a one tradition and one pathway and this is how we do it because we've done this forever. But let go of that idea of who you are and what you do and try things out, because that's really when things will begin to open up. So
amen to that.
That's my
Taylor Doretti. Where would you point people? Where could they find you and learn more about what you're doing and all that good stuff?
Yeah. You can find me, Taylor Doretti, on Instagram. And then you can find the apothecary at medicinebuddha.labs on Instagram as well. I'll have a website coming out very soon. But you find me on Instagram. It's kind of where I'll be announcing and posting everything over the next year. So look forward to connecting with you all. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad we got to do this. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to come on. It was awesome to talk to you.
Absolutely. It was a blast. I loved it. And till